The wind screamed over the plains like a dying animal. Snow flew in sideways sheets, pelting Samuel's leather coat and stinging the exposed skin beneath his hat. He pulled the brim lower and hunched into the saddle, squinting through the whiteout. His horse, a weathered bay named Dusty, snorted and tossed its head, struggling through knee-high drifts. Each step was a fight against the storm and the land, and both were damn good at trying to kill a man. He had no business being out in weather like this. Hell, most folks wouldn't even poke their nose outside. But Samuel Kane wasn't most folks. And he wasn't out here for sport. The barn door had blown off in the night, and he needed to check on the last of his cattle before they froze to statues in the snow. He might have been broke, but he wasn't heartless. The prairie stretched out behind him, flat and empty, like God had run out of ideas after making it. Wind clawed at his coat and howled through the fence posts. Somewhere beneath the snow were the bones of last year's calves. The ones he'd lost when the sickness took hold, and the ones he'd been too drunk to save. He gritted his teeth and cursed the wind. It had been a year to the day since Lily died. The thought struck him like a hammer every time it came. 1 year ago, his wife had bled out on their bed, her face pale as the moon, her body cold before morning. The baby hadn't cried, hadn't even drawn breath. Just silence. All that pain for nothing. He hadn't lit a fire in the hearth since. Hadn't spoken to another soul longer than it took to trade hides or buy grain. Just him, the land, and ghosts that didn't answer when he cursed them. Dusty stopped suddenly, ears twitching. Samuel pulled the reins and looked up. Tracks. They weren't his. Light impressions, almost covered now, faint outlines of boots headed off toward the rise beyond the fence line. Too small for a man. And what kind of fool would be walking out here in the middle of a storm? His first thought was simple, bandit. His second thought worse, ghost. He drew his revolver and nudged Dusty forward. A few minutes passed in eerie quiet, broken only by the wind's moan and the soft creak of leather. The tracks led toward a stand of bare cottonwoods. The blizzard had swallowed the world whole, muting every sound, flattening every shape. But then he saw her. She was crumpled at the base of a tree, half buried in snow, her shawl stiff with frost. Pale fingers clutched at her skirts. She wasn't moving. He dismounted fast, landing with a grunt as snow sucked at his boots. His breath fogged in front of him. He crouched and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. They're faint but real. A heartbeat. Well, hell, he muttered, more to himself than to her. He holstered the revolver and glanced around. Nothing but snow and wind and cold, the kind that seeped into your bones and hollowed you out. She wouldn't last another hour. He wrapped his arms around her shoulders and lifted. She was lighter than she ought to be, starved or sick or both. Her head lolled against his chest. Her hair was damp with melting snow, but he could tell it had once been golden. Her lips were blue. Don't you die, he grunted, heaving her over Dusty's saddle. Not after I found you. It took everything he had to get them both back to the cabin. The snow seemed deeper now, thicker, like the earth was trying to swallow them. He cursed aloud to keep from going numb. By the time they reached the porch, his fingers were stinging and useless, and Dusty's legs shook from the cold. He kicked the cabin door open with his boot. The hinges screamed like an old woman, and the warm scent of pine smoke rushed out to greet them. Inside it was dim but dry. He'd lit a fire before leaving, just coals now but still breathing. He laid the woman on the cot by the hearth, stripped the wet shawl from her shoulders, and wrapped her in the thickest quilt he owned. Then he added wood to the fire, enough to make the walls sweat. For a moment he just stood there, staring. She was young. Maybe 25, maybe less. Her face was scratched up from the wind, her lips cracked. She looked like someone who'd walked a long way and lost everything on the trail. He knew that look. He poured whiskey into a tin cup and dabbed it at her mouth. She flinched but didn't wake. He leaned back and exhaled slowly. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Of course she didn't. He sat down on the edge of the bed, boots still on, revolver close by. Just in case. The blizzard roared outside, but in here the fire popped and cracked, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Shadows that danced like ghosts with nowhere else to go. He didn't sleep much that night. Between checking her pulse, feeding the fire, and listening to the wind howl like wolves at the door, he barely closed his eyes. Once she stirred and murmured something he couldn't catch. Her hand gripped the blanket tight, and he had to pry it free to stop her from choking herself. Morning came slowly, gray and brittle, like the light itself might shatter. The storm hadn't let up. Samuel poured water into a kettle and hung it above the fire. His hands trembled from cold and worry and the memories clawing up the walls of his chest. The woman coughed. He turned quickly. She blinked, dazed. Her voice came out like sand. Where? You're safe, he said gruffly. Cabin's mine. Found you out near the rise. She tried to sit up and failed. Easy, he added. You almost froze solid. Her eyes, blue or maybe green in the firelight, focused on his face. You saved me. He didn't answer that. Just passed her the tin cup, now filled with warm water. She sipped, hands shaking. Then, my name's Clara. He nodded once. Samuel. A long silence followed. Wind beat against the windows. Somewhere outside, the porch creaked like it might fall in. I was walking, she said suddenly. Tried to get to the next station. Got turned around. Station. She hesitated. Mail order bride. Man never showed. Samuel frowned. So you went walking across the prairie in a snowstorm? I didn't plan on a snowstorm, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Didn't plan on anything, really? He looked away. He understood that kind of desperation too well. Well, he muttered, standing. You're here now. She didn't speak again for a while. Just curled into the blanket, eyes half closed. The fire cast a soft glow across her face, and for a moment she looked peaceful. Almost like someone who hadn't nearly died the night before. Samuel went to the door and looked out. Snow piled high against the fence. The wind was still going strong, but it had changed, less wild, more tired. The worst might be over. He closed the door and leaned against it. He hadn't expected company. He hadn't wanted it. But here she was. And something in the cabin felt different now, like maybe, just maybe, the ghosts weren't the only ones left with a voice in this place. He looked at Clara again. She was asleep. And he didn't know it yet, but that was the moment his life turned. The storm lasted 2 more days. Snow beat against the windows with icy fists while Samuel tended the fire, the animals, and the quiet woman sleeping in his bed. Clara. She barely stirred, her body slowly shedding the frost that had nearly claimed her. He kept water hot, fed her spoonfuls of broth when she was conscious, and muttered short, gruff updates she might not have heard. Samuel had never been good at talking, not since Lily died. The words he once shared so freely with her had withered, like vines without sunlight. But now, with Clara shivering beneath his old quilt, he found himself speaking aloud again, mostly to fill the space. You know, I built this cabin with my own hands. Took me 2 summers. Lily said I was stubborn as a mule with a broke leg. He chuckled under his breath. She wasn't wrong. Clara didn't respond. But her breathing was steady now. She wasn't dying. That was something. On the 3rd morning, Samuel opened the door to a world glazed in white silence. The snow had stopped. Everything was still, like the land was holding its breath. He stepped outside to check the barn, muscles sore from days without rest. The cold bit less harshly now, but the quiet unnerved him. He missed the sound of hooves, of voices, of anything that proved life hadn't completely abandoned this stretch of prairie. When he came back in, Clara was awake. She was sitting up, pale and wrapped in every blanket he owned, her eyes fixed on the fire. She turned her head as he stepped in. You're back, she said. Her voice cracked like thin ice. Didn't go far. He set down the bucket and crouched beside her. You look better. Color in your cheeks. She gave him a faint, worn smile. Feel like I was chewed up and spit out by something mean. That'd be the blizzard. He handed her a cup of warm broth. Or maybe the plains themselves. Either way, you're lucky. She took the cup with trembling hands. I shouldn't be alive. Neither should I, he said softly, surprising himself. They sat in silence, the fire snapping between them. Outside, icicles dripped from the eaves, the world beginning to thaw. Thank you, she said after a moment. For saving me. He nodded. Didn't feel like a choice. Found you out there, didn't have it in me to walk away. I'm not sure I would have done the same, she admitted, voice low. It's hard to trust folks these days. I stopped trusting folks years ago. She looked at him, studying his face. But you helped me. He shifted uncomfortably and rose to toss more logs on the fire. Don't read too much into it. Her silence lingered. Then, softly, I don't know where to go now. Samuel kept his back to her. The question was there, hanging in the smoke. Could she stay? Would he let her? I was promised a life, she continued, her voice gaining strength. Came all the way from Missouri. Paid for my ticket with the last of my mother's silver. The man who sent for me never came. They said he'd skip town. Left debts behind. Samuel turned. You walked from the station? Didn't have a choice. Thought maybe I could find someone to help. Or at least someplace warm. She swallowed hard. I got turned around. The storm came in fast. He crossed the room and poured himself a drink. Whiskey burned the edge off his thoughts. You're lucky to be stubborn. Most folks would not have lasted half a mile in that mess. She smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. Stubborn's all I've ever been. Got me in trouble more often than not. What kind of trouble? She hesitated. Her eyes darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. The kind that follows you. He watched her a moment longer, then let it lie. Everyone had scars. Some just weren't ready to show them yet. Later, as the sun sagged toward the horizon, he taught her to split kindling. Her hands were clumsy, soft from sewing or service work, not from swinging an axe. You're holding it wrong, he said, stepping behind her. Grip firm, not tight. Let the tool do the work. She adjusted her stance. Like this? Better. Don't think about it, just swing. She brought the axe down. The wood barely chipped. Like a squirrel trying to chop molasses, he muttered. She laughed, sudden and bright. Well, it's better than nothing. He tried not to smile. By dusk, the cabin smelled of stew and smoke. Clara stirred the pot while he patched a broken window pane. They didn't speak much, but the silence felt different now, less like a wound, more like a shared blanket. Over dinner, she finally asked, who was she? Samuel didn't look up. My wife. Clara nodded, not pressing. She died, he said, voice low. Last year. Giving birth. Her spoon stilled. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but his jaw tightened. Buried them both out back. Haven't touched the room since. Clara's voice was gentle. You've been alone a long time. Long enough to forget how to talk to someone without raising my voice or pouring a drink first. She reached across the table and touched his hand. Just a light graze. He didn't pull away. That night, the wind returned, not as vicious but enough to rattle the windows. Samuel checked the rifle by the door out of habit. Clara had taken to sleeping on the cot by the fire, refusing the bed again and again no matter how many times he offered. He was just drifting to sleep in his chair when her scream cut the air. He bolted upright. Clara. She was thrashing under the quilt, face contorted, fists clenched. He dropped beside her, grabbing her shoulders. Clara. Wake up, it's just a dream. Her eyes snapped open, wild and glassy. She gasped like she'd been drowning. Easy, he said, steadying her. You're safe. You're here. She clung to his arm, breath ragged. I thought he found me. Samuel frowned. Who? She hesitated, then whispered, the man I was supposed to marry. He wasn't just a liar. He's dangerous. Samuel's hand flexed over hers. Tell me what happened. She looked away, eyes flickering in the firelight. He met me at the station. Told me he'd take me home after he settled the score. But the way he looked at me, like I was something he'd already bought. When he got angry, he grabbed me hard. I saw it then, he wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for property. Samuel's jaw tensed. You ran. I got one chance when he left to collect something. I took it. I didn't think he'd follow. Did he? She didn't answer. But the fear in her eyes told him everything. He leaned back, mind churning. A man like that, angry, entitled, used to getting his way, he wouldn't let something go easy. Samuel stared into the fire, his voice rough as gravel. If he comes here, he won't leave the way he came. Clara didn't say anything. But she reached for his hand again. This time he didn't pull away. Outside, the wind groaned like a warning. And somewhere far beyond the snow-covered hills, footsteps might have already begun to follow the trail she left behind. The first sign came with the crows. Two of them, black as night tar and too bold for their own good, perched on the fence post near the barn just after dawn. Samuel spotted them through the frost-glazed window, silent and watchful. Not pecking. Not calling. Just waiting. He didn't like it. Crows weren't uncommon, not out here. But these ones had the look of something smarter, like they knew something he didn't. Like they were watching for blood. Clara stood behind him, her fingers twisting in the hem of her borrowed dress. What is it? He kept his eyes on the birds. Trouble, maybe? She stepped closer, following his gaze. Do you think he's coming? Samuel didn't answer at first. The cabin was still, warm from the morning fire, but tension had crept into every beam of wood, every breath between them. I think if someone like that lost you, he said finally, he won't rest easy until he finds you again. Outside, the crows flapped off into the trees, like they'd seen enough. Samuel, saddled dusty that afternoon, scanned the horizon with a narrowed gaze. The snow had begun to melt in patches, leaving behind deep mud and slush. Tracks would hold now. And if someone was coming, they'd be visible before long. He rode to the ridge overlooking the southern plain. Nothing but wind and gray sky. But something in his gut stirred. On the ride back he found a sign he hadn't expected. A cigarette stub. Still warm. Fresh boot prints beside it. Not his. Not Clara's. He stared at them, tension snapping tight in his chest. There were 2 sets. One light. One heavy. And both leading back toward the tree line. By the time he returned to the cabin, dusk was sliding in fast. Clara sat by the fire, mending one of his old shirts with surprisingly steady hands. She looked up as he entered, reading his face before he said a word. "They're here, aren't they?" He closed the door behind him, bolting it tight. "Soon." She stood slowly. "How many?" "2, maybe more." Didn't wait to find out. Clara didn't flinch. She moved with a quiet certainty, placing the shirt aside and tying her hair back. Her fingers trembled only once, when she reached for the pistol he'd shown her how to load the day before. "You sure you remember how to use it?" "I remember." Samuel nodded, proud and worried all at once. She was a survivor, no doubt about it. But even survivors bleed. That night they didn't sleep. He kept to the window, rifle in hand, eyes flicking between trees, fence line, and the shadows that moved when the wind blew. Clara sat in the chair by the fire, blanket over her legs, pistol hidden in its folds. She didn't ask for comfort. She didn't offer any. They just existed together in a state of waiting, stretched thin. Sometime past midnight the first sound came. A distant horse. Samuel stiffened. Clara's breath caught. Then another. He stepped to the window. Shapes moved through the snow, slow and careful. Lantern light bobbed between them like fireflies caught in a jar. 3 riders. One walking his horse. The others scanning the cabin like it might blink. Samuel muttered, "Idiots are making no effort to hide. Either they think they've already won, or they're trying to rattle us." Clara stood. Her lips pressed into a thin, determined line. "If he's with them he'll come inside. He always does." Samuel checked the door, then the rifle's chamber. "Loaded. Ready." He looked at her. "You see him, you shoot. Don't wait. Don't warn. Just shoot." She nodded once. Boots crunched outside. A fist banged on the door. "Open up, friend," a voice called, syrupy and low. "Ain't looking for trouble. Just seeking some shelter from the cold." Samuel didn't move. Didn't answer. "You got a lady in there?" the voice added, rougher now. "We're looking for someone. Blonde. About so tall. Lost her way in the storm." Clara's breath was shallow. Samuel raised the rifle. "Move away from the door," he said, loud enough for them to hear. "Ain't no shelter here for liars." Pause. Then laughter. "Fair enough, Kane," said a different voice, this one familiar, drawling with menace. "Didn't think you'd play dumb, but I respect it." Samuel froze. "That voice." Clara whispered, "That's him." "You got something of mine," the voice continued. "I'm here to take her back." "She's not yours," Samuel replied. A moment of silence. Then, "That's real sweet. But she's made promises. I pay good money. She's mine by contract and law." Clara stepped beside Samuel. Her voice rang out, clear and fierce. "I never signed a damn thing. And I'm not going anywhere with you." The voice sharpened. "That's a mistake, Clara. I'll give you one chance to step outside and come quiet. After that, what happens is on you." Samuel lowered the rifle barrel a fraction. "Then let it be on me." The shot cracked through the window before the words finished leaving his mouth. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Clara dropped to the floor. Samuel fired once, twice, ducking below the frame. A scream echoed into the trees. Then silence. "Clara," he called. "I'm fine," she breathed. "Didn't hit me." He crawled to her side. They huddled close, listening. The horses outside had panicked. Snorts, stomps, ropes snapping. Then another voice shouted, panicked, "He's hit. Jack's hit." Samuel peeked through the hole in the window. One man lay face down in the snow, blood soaking the white around him. Another crouched behind a fallen log, dragging the body by the collar. The third was gone. He turned to Clara. "Stay here." "No. You don't need to see this." She loaded another bullet into the pistol. "I do." They moved together out the back, circling wide around the cabin. Moonlight spilled over the prairie, casting everything in pale blue. Samuel spotted the third man slinking toward the back porch. He raised his rifle, then paused. Something felt off. Too quiet. The man spun suddenly, gun raised, firing blind. Samuel dropped low, pulled the trigger. The shot took him clean through the shoulder. He dropped like a sack of grain. Clara stood behind Samuel, pistol raised, eyes wide but steady. Is it him? Samuel walked over, kicked the weapon away and turned the man onto his back. The face that stared up at him was familiar, greasy hair, bruised jaw, rage simmering beneath pain. Hello, sweetheart. The man coughed, blood on his lips. Clara stepped forward. She looked him in the eye. You don't get to call me that. He smiled, teeth red. You think this changes anything? There'll be more of me. Always more. She raised the pistol. Samuel touched her arm. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Her finger tightened. Click. Empty chamber. The man laughed. Samuel fired once. The echo rang through the hills, sending the crows screaming from the trees. They buried the bodies the next day. No crosses. No names. Just dirt and snow. By the time the sun rose again, the tracks had vanished. The land was quiet once more. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. Clara sat at the window, steaming mug in her hands, watching the ridge. Samuel stood behind her, arms crossed, silent. Neither said the words. They didn't have to. The ghosts weren't gone. But they weren't the only ones here anymore. And for the first time in a long while, the land didn't feel quite so lonely. The thaw came slowly that spring, reluctant and cold-blooded, like the land was still mourning what had been buried beneath it. Snow melted in sluggish trickles, forming slick rivers through the furrows Samuel had once plowed. The wind softened, but it hadn't forgotten how to bite. Samuel stood at the edge of the barn one morning, arms braced on the rail as he watched the horizon through squinted eyes. He didn't say a word. Hadn't, not really, in days. Inside the cabin, Clara had begun to speak less too, not out of silence but out of thought. She moved with purpose now, tended the fire without asking, fed the animals, sewed and stitched without complaint. But something had shifted in her. Not broken. Hardened. She wasn't the woman he'd pulled from the snow. And he wasn't the man who'd gone looking for her either. Your hands, she said one evening, her voice low. He looked down. They were raw, scraped, bandaged in places. Blood from fence repairs and rifle oil. From work, from violence. He didn't remember half the cuts. You don't have to carry it all, you know, she murmured. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because he did. It was his land. His home. His failure if they starved. His guilt if she bled again. That night, he lay awake long after the fire died. Clara's breathing was soft beside him, steady. Safe. But he wasn't. Not really. He saw them in his dreams. The men. The snow. The look in her eyes when the pistol had clicked empty. He had fired. He had chosen to end it. Not because he enjoyed it, hell no, but because he had to. Because that man would have crawled back from hell itself to drag Clara under again. Because Samuel had made a promise, long before she ever asked him to. He would keep her safe, even if it broke him. Weeks passed. The road cleared. Spring flowers appeared in bursts of purple and yellow near the creek. But the quiet didn't last. One morning, a rider appeared. Alone. Samuel saw him from the ridge, black horse, clean hat, long duster coat flapping in the wind. Professional. Not a rancher. Not a friend. He rode up slow, calm as Sunday morning. No rifle in hand, but the way he sat the saddle told Samuel all he needed to know. This wasn't a drifter. This was a hunter. Samuel met him at the fence, shotgun loose in his grip. The man didn't flinch. Samuel Kane? That's me. The rider nodded. Name's Briggs. I'm with the Territory Marshal's office. Samuel didn't lower the shotgun. You're awful far from any office. Briggs smiled. Yeah. Well, dead bodies tend to draw attention even out here. Samuel's shoulders stiffened. That's so. 3 men. Shot and buried. No reports filed. No notices posted. Not even a whisper. That looks suspicious from where I'm sitting. Samuel didn't blink. They came to kill us. I believe you, Briggs said. Still, law needs its dues. There's talk in town. One of them boys had family. The kind that makes noise. You here to arrest me? Briggs considered that. No, not yet. I'm here to ask questions. See if you're the man folks say you are. Samuel glanced toward the cabin. I'm not the man I used to be. Briggs followed his gaze. Few of us are. They stood quiet for a while. Wind whistled through the dead grass. Crows passed overhead. Finally Briggs spoke. I can bury this. Say it was self-defense. But there's conditions. I figured. You keep your nose clean. You stay on this land. No more shootouts. No more ghosts. You live quiet. Understand? Samuel nodded once. I can do quiet. Briggs turned his horse, preparing to ride. "One more thing," he said over his shoulder. "The girl. She with you by choice?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "She's not a girl." "And yes, she is." Briggs gave him a look, one that held weight. Then he rode off without another word. That evening, Samuel told Clara everything. Every word. Every risk. She listened, face unreadable. "Do you regret it?" she asked at last. He stared at the floor. "Sometimes." "Do you regret saving me?" He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Never." A week later, the final test came. Riders. 3 again, but not like the others. These ones weren't hunting with guns drawn. They wore badges, rusted and crooked. Deputies from a nearby county. Not marshals. Just men with grudges and too much pride. They came mid-afternoon, all brass and threats. Samuel Kane, the lead one, barked, "We're taking you in. That woman too. You've been harboring a fugitive and killing honest men." Samuel stood on the porch, shotgun resting against the doorframe. "Those men weren't honest." "You don't get to decide that," the man snapped. "The law does." "The law already came and left." The man spat. "That marshal don't speak for us." Samuel saw it then. In their eyes. This wasn't about justice. It was about power. About revenge. Maybe they were kin to one of the men buried under his orchard. Maybe not. It didn't matter. They wanted a fight. Clara appeared beside him. No pistol this time. Just her voice. "If you lay a hand on him," she said, calm as ever, "I'll tear your throat out myself." The deputies laughed. But Samuel didn't. He saw the fire in her eyes. And something in him settled. "I'm not that man anymore," he said. The deputies stopped laughing. "But I will be again," he continued, stepping forward, "if you make me." He saw their hands twitch. One of them started to reach for his holster. Samuel didn't hesitate. His shotgun roared once. Buckshot hit the dirt inches from their boots. "I miss on purpose once," he said. "I don't do it twice." They backed up. Cowards, the lot of them. Full of talk and no taste for real pain. "This ain't over," the lead one hissed. "It is," Samuel said, "for you." They rode off fast, tails tucked. Samuel lowered the shotgun, his heart pounding. Clara stepped to his side. "That was loud." "Effective," he said. She smiled. "You're changing." "Maybe." He turned to her. "You still staying?" She looked around the land, the cabin, the hills behind them. Then back to him. "I'm not just staying," she said. "I'm building." In the months that followed, they did just that. Fences were mended. Seeds planted. Horses bred. A second room was added to the cabin, and Clara picked the color for the curtains herself. Sunset orange, warm and wild. The nightmares faded. Slowly. Like smoke leaving a burned-out house. They didn't talk about the bodies. Not anymore. Not the riders. Not the snow. Not the scream of the wind. But they carried those memories like old coins, worn, heavy, tucked away in their pockets. One night, as summer crept over the prairie, Samuel sat on the porch, Clara's head on his shoulder. The stars burned above them, vast and indifferent. "I used to be afraid of dying," he said. "And now?" He turned to her. "Now I'm afraid of wasting what I've got left." She laced her fingers with his. "You're not," she said. And he believed her. "So if you've made it this far, if your heart raced when the gun fired or your throat ached when she stood her ground, remember this: people change. Not fast. Not easy. But when the storm hits, when everything freezes over and there's nowhere to run, that's when you find out who you really are." Samuel Kane found out. He became the man he had to be. And Clara? She became the woman who saved him right back. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. We've got more Wild West tales coming, and every heart counts. The desert did not forgive. Its winds bit like teeth, its sands stung like judgment, and the sun, merciless and swollen above the mesa, burned down on everything as if it too bore a grudge. And beneath that heat, bound at the wrists and blistered from a week of captivity, walked a woman the world had chosen to forget. Nalin's bare feet dragged furrows in the dirt. Her ankles were raw where the rope chafed, her back striped with lashes that scabbed and reopened with every jolt of the mule cart she'd been tethered to. The 3 bounty hunters who led her treated her less like a prisoner and more like a trophy. One swigged rotgut whiskey from a dented flask, wiping his mouth with the same hand that held her chain. "Almost there," the tallest one said, squinting toward the distant town. "Sheriff will give a good bounty for this one. Maybe the miners'll pay extra to see her dance." Laughter broke between them, crude and sharp, like spurs across glass. Nalin didn't flinch. She hadn't in days. Not since the night they'd raided her uncle's camp, slaughtered 2 boys in their sleep, and claimed her under false charges: witchcraft, murder, and treason. The irony was bitter. The real killer had worn a blue uniform and a grin full of lies. But justice didn't wear feathers in these lands. It rode on horses with badges and rifles. She lifted her chin. If death was coming, it would not find her bowed. Up ahead, the town of Rustwater shimmered in the heat, a spit of buildings barely clinging to existence, where wooden signs creaked in the wind and even the dogs looked mean. A child stopped playing with a stick to gape as they passed. His mother yanked him back, hissing something about Apache devils. A rock bounced off Nalin's ribs. Another struck her temple. Blood trickled down her cheek, warm and slow. Behind the curtain of dust, a man leaned against the edge of the livery stable, half hidden in shadow. He chewed the stem of a matchstick and watched the procession with eyes the color of old leather, creased, tired, and faintly amused. Samuel Cutter didn't look like a hero. He wore a sweat-stained hat, one boot half unstitched at the sole, and a coat too long for his frame. His horse, a bay gelding with a lazy gait, had more spit than speed. But he saw things other men ignored. And the moment he laid eyes on the girl in chains, he spat the match into the dirt and stood straighter. The sheriff emerged from his office, a swollen man with a crooked belt and a voice like a cracked bell. "You boys brought me a prize or a problem?" "Both, reckon," said the leader, grinning. "Apache witch. Killed a settler near Fort Riley. Witness said she cursed his son before he dropped dead. Got a bounty of $20, dead or alive." "Looks more dead than alive already," the sheriff muttered. "Tie her out back. I'll wire the fort. If they want her, they can come fetch her. Otherwise, we'll make use of her." Samuel's fingers curled around his belt. He'd seen lynchings before. Seen men hanged for less than a whisper. He turned away muttering, "Ain't my fight." But the words felt sour in his mouth. That night, Rustwater slept beneath a brittle sky. Coyotes yipped in the distance. The saloon spilled light onto the street, where men drank and gambled and spoke of land like it was something they owned. Samuel nursed a warm beer and pretended not to watch the back alley where the girl had been chained to a post like a mutt. She sat in the dirt, lips cracked, humming something faint and strange. It wasn't a song he knew, no melody, no rhythm. Just breath and broken syllables. A prayer maybe. Or a curse. A sudden snap of leather. One of the bounty hunters stood over her with a whip. "Sing louder, squaw. Maybe you'll charm the devil himself." The lash cracked. Samuel was moving before he knew why. His beer hit the ground. His hand found the revolver at his hip like it had been waiting for permission. The gunshot split the night like thunder. The bounty hunter staggered, eyes wide, then dropped into the dust without a sound. The others leapt up from their poker game, hands to holsters, but Samuel was already pulling the girl to her feet. "Can you run?" he asked. She blinked at him, blood in her lashes. "Guess we'll find out." They ran. Gunfire lit the alley in bursts. Shouts followed. A bullet tore through Samuel's sleeve. Another sparked off a trough. He shoved the girl behind a crate, fired twice, and ducked as a lantern exploded nearby. They reached the stables in a haze of smoke and noise. Samuel's horse whinnied in protest, already saddled from instinct or luck. He tossed Nalin up first, then swung up behind her, boots digging into the stirrups. Ropes slapped against wood as the town roused. "Stop them. That bastard just killed Dale." Samuel grinned as the horse kicked forward. He deserved worse. The gelding galloped through the main street, scattering drunks and lawmen. A bullet clipped the edge of the saddle. Another screamed past his ear. He didn't slow down. They didn't stop until the lights of Rustwater were dust behind them. In the silence that followed, the desert returned. The stars stretched across the sky, cold and endless. Samuel pulled the horse to a halt near a dry wash and dismounted, letting Nalin slide off carefully. She didn't speak. Her hands trembled as she touched the wound on her temple, the blood already drying. Samuel broke the silence. "Name's Samuel. Samuel Cutter." Still nothing. "Figure I just pissed off every drunken sheriff within 50 miles. Hope you were worth it." She looked at him then, eyes dark and sharp as obsidian. "You're a fool." "Fair," he said, lighting a cigarette. "But I'm a fool who just saved your life. For now." He blew smoke at the stars. "Ain't that always the case?" Wind rustled the dry mesquite. Somewhere far off an owl hooted once. Samuel eyed the girl from the corner of his vision. She sat like stone, legs pulled to her chest, eyes locked on the shadows. "What did you do?" he asked finally. Back in Fort Riley. I buried my cousin. Her voice was low, strained. The soldiers said it was treason. And the settler? She hesitated. He tried to take me. I stopped him. Samuel nodded. He believed her. Not because of the words, but the way she said them, steady and without apology. Well, he said, tossing the cigarette aside, guess that makes us both outlaws. She looked at him then, truly looked, and in her gaze he saw not gratitude or fear, but challenge. He grinned. You planning on killing me in my sleep? Not yet. Good. You're better company than my horse. The fire crackled between them. In the distance, faint as memory, a drumbeat echoed across the plains. Samuel tilted his head. You hear that? She nodded. They're coming. Friends of yours? No, her eyes gleamed in the dark. Yours. Samuel reached for his revolver, jaw tightening. The firelight cast flickering shadows across their faces. For the first time in years he felt alive. And somewhere beneath the fear and smoke, a strange thing stirred in his chest, something like purpose. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't ride away. Not this time. The sun rose red the next morning, bleeding over the ridges like a warning. Samuel squinted into the glare, his hat pulled low, blood dried stiff on his sleeve. The desert around them stretched out in every direction, cracked and empty. No sign of pursuit. Not yet. Nalin walked ahead of him, barefoot still, but moving with a strange quiet grace that defied her wounds. She hadn't spoken since they'd broken camp. She hadn't needed to. The silence between them had a weight to it now. Not distrust exactly, but something cautious, like two animals feeling out the boundaries of the other's pain. He watched her pause at a patch of dry scrub, kneeling to press her fingers into the dirt. When she stood again, she nodded toward the canyon mouth in the distance. This way, she said. Samuel followed. He didn't ask how she knew. He'd stopped questioning the things she sensed. There was something about her, like the land itself whispered to her in a language he couldn't hear. By midday the wind had picked up, dragging grit into their eyes, teeth, and clothes. The sky pulsed with heat, and Samuel could feel it beating down on the back of his neck like a hammer. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. Still nothing. They'll come, Nalin said, not looking back. You always read minds or just mine? She said nothing, just kept walking. They reached a gulch by late afternoon, its base littered with bone-white rocks and thornbush. Samuel tied the horse under a ledge and settled beside her in the shade, tossing her a canteen. She drank sparingly. Why'd you run back there? He asked. I didn't, she replied. You dragged me. He laughed once, dry as the wind. You're welcome. You didn't do it for me. He looked at her. She wasn't wrong. He'd pulled that trigger because something about the way the man had raised that whip had snapped something in him. Something old and buried deep. The girl had just been the spark. No, he said. I didn't. She studied him, her face unreadable. Then why? Samuel leaned back against the stone, staring up at the pale sky. I once shot a boy, he said. Back in the war. 13 maybe. Running at me with a wooden pistol. Thought it was real. Pulled the trigger before I even thought. Took me 5 years to admit he wasn't trying to kill me. Just scared. Lost. He paused, the silence stretching thin. Point is, I don't like making the same mistake twice. Nalin didn't respond right away. When she finally did, her voice was quieter. I've killed two. But never a child. Never without reason. Neither did I, he said, and the words hung there, brittle and unsure. They camped in the gulch that night, surrounded by cliffs that shimmered in the moonlight like bones. Coyotes howled somewhere far off. Samuel cleaned his revolver. Nalin sat cross-legged, sharpening a small blade she'd hidden in her boot. Neither of them slept much. Sometime after midnight, she spoke again. My mother was a medicine woman. She taught me stories, songs, how to heal. When the soldiers came, they called her a witch. Burned our home to the ground. My uncle took me in, raised me in secret. We moved constantly. Trusted no one. Then a traitor came. Said he could help. Said the war was over. He lied. Samuel listened in silence. The settler he worked for wanted land. My uncle refused. So they framed me. Said I killed him. Said I cursed him. I didn't even touch him. You don't have to convince me, Samuel said. I'm not. I just want someone to remember the truth. He nodded. I will. By dawn they were moving again. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of horses. Riders. Close. They made it to an abandoned trading post by midday. Half-rotted beams and a collapsed roof. A rusted sign swung in the breeze, Mercantile. The place had been dead for years, but the stone walls still offered cover. Samuel moved quickly, checking sight lines, counting rounds. 6 in the chamber, 12 in his belt. Nalin searched the shelves. Found a jar of dried beans. She opened it, sniffed, and dumped the contents. Worms had claimed them first. "We can't stay long," Samuel said. "They're not far," she agreed. He watched her as she moved. She had changed. Her silence wasn't fear, it was calculation. Control. She moved with purpose, eyes always alert. Whatever fragility he'd seen in her that first night was gone now. They waited. The first sound was the jingle of tack. Then hoofbeats. 5 riders, maybe 6. Samuel loaded his rifle, breathing slow and shallow. "Get behind the counter," he muttered. Nalin didn't argue. She slipped into the shadows. The first rider came into view, a thick-necked man with a blue kerchief and a long-barreled shotgun. 2 more flanked him, one missing an eye, the other with a rifle slung low. "Looks empty," One Eye muttered. "Check anyway. That bastard cutter might be holed up inside." They dismounted. Samuel waited until the third man passed the doorway. Then he fired. The first shot blew through the man's shoulder. He screamed, dropping his rifle. Chaos exploded. Horses screamed. One Eye dove for cover, but Samuel's second shot caught him in the thigh. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Bullets chewed through wood. Nalin leapt from the counter and plunged her blade into the fourth man as he came around the side, fast and silent. He gasped, staggered back, and fell into the dust. "Go!" Samuel barked. They ran. Bullets whistled past. A splinter carved a line across Samuel's cheek. Nalin grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back. One Eye shouted orders, limping toward cover. Another man crawled, bleeding from the gut, yelling for help. Samuel kicked open a back door and pulled Nalin through. They tumbled into the alley behind the trading post, the horse still tethered under a low awning. He winced as he swung into the saddle, blood spreading across his shirt. Not deep, but it stung. "You hit?" she asked, vaulting up behind him. "Just a scratch," he said through gritted teeth. "Remind me to stop playing hero." They rode hard, faster than before. Dust churned behind them, choking the air. They didn't stop until the canyon swallowed them whole. At a narrow bend in the rock, Samuel pulled the horse to a halt and slid off, holding his side. Nalin caught him as he staggered. "You need to lie down." "No time," he hissed. She pushed him against a rock and tore his shirt open. The graze ran along his ribs, red and angry. Not fatal, but bad enough to slow him down. "I've seen worse," he muttered. "Then hold still." She cleaned it with water and herbs she'd gathered earlier, working fast. Her fingers were steady. Her touch gentle. "You're lucky," she said. "It missed the bone. Luck's not usually my friend. Maybe you're making new ones." He chuckled, winced, and leaned back. "God, I hate this desert." She smiled faintly. "It hates you back." They rested there, hidden among the stones, the sound of distant hoofbeats fading into silence. Samuel stared up at the sky. "You think they'll keep coming?" "They want the bounty," she said. "They won't stop." He nodded. "Then we keep riding." "No," she looked east, where the canyon deepened. "We go to the sacred place. They won't follow us there." "Not all the way." Samuel frowned. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He pushed himself up, groaning. "Then lead the way, Redbird. But next time I shoot someone for you, maybe give me a warning." She smirked. "Next time I'll shoot first." They set off again, 2 outlaws with blood on their clothes and a war on their heels, the desert stretching endlessly before them. Behind them, blood darkened the dust. Ahead, the canyon waited. They entered the canyon just before dusk. It was not a place marked on maps. The walls rose high and narrow, carved smooth by wind and centuries. Shadows crawled along the stone, deepening to black as the light slipped away. The temperature dropped fast. Samuel felt it in his bones, like the land itself was remembering something too old to speak. Nalin rode ahead, quiet but sure-footed, guiding them along a trail only she could see. Her posture had changed. She wasn't the hunted anymore. Not entirely. There was purpose in her now, a straightness to her spine, a set to her jaw that hadn't been there days ago. Samuel followed, blood still dried to his ribs, pain flaring every time the horse jolted. He said nothing. He'd learned not to waste words when there was dust in your throat and ghosts behind your heels. The trail narrowed, forcing them to dismount. Nalin led the horse by the reins, her fingers brushing the stone occasionally, like she was listening with her skin. "What is this place?" Samuel asked, voice low. "It's where the old ones walked," she said. Before the wars. Before the treaties. There's a spirit here that doesn't forget. That's supposed to comfort me? It should scare you, she said. It scares me. He didn't argue. They reached a small plateau tucked between cliffs, half hidden by hanging vines and sun-bleached boulders. There, carved into the canyon wall, was a figure, weather-worn and ancient. A woman, arms raised, with a snake curling around her shoulders. Nalin bowed her head. Samuel took off his hat. This is where we make our stand, she said. Samuel frowned. What makes you so sure they'll come this far? Because men don't know where to stop. He grunted, running a hand over his jaw. Fair enough. They set up camp near the carving, the fire small and smokeless. Nalin prepared a poultice for his wound, pressing it against his ribs with practiced care. The pain nearly took his breath. You were a soldier, she said quietly. Yeah. Do you still believe in what you fought for? Samuel stared into the fire, the flames catching in his eyes like distant gunfire. Once, he said. Long time ago. Before the killing started to feel like breathing. She didn't press him. She just wrapped the cloth tight, tied it off and sat back. I saw my brother die in a raid, she said after a long silence. He was 14. They said he had a knife. He didn't. It was a carving tool. He'd been making a flute. Samuel closed his eyes. I'm sorry. So was he. The canyon held their silence like a tomb. Later, while the fire burned low, Samuel cleaned his rifle again. It was the third time that day. Nalin sharpened her blade, but her eyes were on the shadows dancing along the canyon walls. They'll come by morning, she said. You that certain? I can feel it. The canyon, it stirs when death approaches. Samuel didn't like that. He didn't believe in curses or spirits, but there was something about this place. Too still, too watching. He could feel the weight of unseen things pressing close. You ever think about running? He asked. I've done nothing but run, she said. But this is where I stop. You planning on dying here? I'm planning on being remembered. He couldn't argue with that. They slept in shifts. Samuel took the first watch, staring out across the narrow pass where any man would have to ride single file. The rifle lay across his lap, the moonlight silvering its barrel. He thought of the men chasing them, men he once might have called brothers. Guns for hire. Cowards with law badges. The sort that never saw the people they hunted, only the price tags on their heads. When he finally dozed off, his dreams were full of smoke and drumbeats. Nalin woke him before dawn. They're here, she whispered. He sat up fast, groaning as his ribs flared. The sky was pale, the stars fading. The canyon echoed with faint hoofbeats. He moved to the edge of the plateau and peered down. 6 riders. All armed. One of them, broad-shouldered, with a white scar across his jaw, rode in front. Briggs. Samuel remembered him from Fort Collins. Maine. Efficient. Paid by the scalp. They brought hell, he muttered. Nalin didn't flinch. She slipped into position behind a boulder, her knife already drawn. Her eyes were steady. Samuel raised his rifle. The first shot cracked like lightning. The lead rider tumbled from his horse, neck bent at a sick angle. Gunfire erupted. The canyon became a furnace of sound, bullets sparking off stone, horses screaming, men shouting into the echoes. Samuel fired again, dropped another. But they kept coming. One of the bounty men scrambled up a side path, flanking left. Nalin was on him in seconds, her blade flashing, swift and silent. He never made a sound. Samuel ducked as a shot clipped the stone near his ear. He returned fire, teeth gritted. Blood trickled down his temple. His breath came in sharp, ragged pulls. Briggs called out from below, voice booming. Give us the girl, Cutter. You might walk away. Samuel wiped sweat from his brow and leaned out to fire again. Go to hell. A bullet caught him in the leg, knocking him backward. He landed hard, biting back a scream. Nalin rushed to his side, dragging him into cover. Blood poured from the wound, hot and fast. You still breathing? She asked. Barely. Then you're still fighting. He laughed, short and bitter. 2 more bounty hunters tried to charge the slope. Nalin met them halfway. One fell screaming. The other fled, but not far. Briggs watched it all from his horse, unmoving. Then he dismounted, drew his rifle and began climbing. Slow. Deliberate. A man who knew death but didn't fear it. Samuel tried to stand. Couldn't. Nalin pressed her blade into his hand. If I fall, you finish him. You planning on dying now? I'm planning on ending this. She left him propped against the rocks and walked toward the narrow rise where Briggs climbed. The dawn light caught her silhouette, tattered dress, bloodied arms, dark hair wild in the wind. She looked like a warrior. Or a ghost. Briggs raised his rifle. Nalin didn't stop. He fired. Missed. She lunged. They crashed into the dirt, struggling, grunting, fists slamming into flesh, boots kicking dust. He was stronger. But she was faster. Her blade caught him in the side. He roared and threw her back. Samuel raised the rifle with trembling hands. Briggs stood over Nalin, weapon raised. Samuel fired. The bullet hit Briggs in the throat. He dropped without a sound. It was over. The last bounty man turned and rode hard back the way he came, leaving only hoofprints and fear in his wake. Nalin crawled to Samuel's side, her breath ragged. His face was pale, lips bloodless. "Still here?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it." She smiled faintly. "We won. For now." They sat there as the sun rose, turning the canyon gold. Blood soaked the sand. The spirits, if they were there, were silent. "I think the old ones are satisfied," she whispered. Samuel nodded, his hand finding hers. "Let's make sure they're not the only ones who remember." Somewhere far below, the desert wind began to carry the scent of smoke. And something else too. Change. The sky was turning iron gray when the sound of hooves returned. Samuel lay against the canyon wall, breath shallow, leg wound wrapped tight with a strip torn from his shirt. The pain was dull now, deep and settled like a nail hammered into old wood. He kept his rifle close, though the bullets were down to 4. One for each man left, he figured. Maybe. If he shot clean. Nalin crouched beside the narrow pass, eyes on the ridge above. Her hair was matted with blood, some hers, some not. The knife at her side was stained dark, her fingers twitching with tension. She hadn't spoken much since Briggs fell. Just kept watching, listening. Like she could hear the earth breathe. "They're coming back," she said. Samuel nodded once. He didn't ask how she knew. He could feel it too, like pressure behind the eyes before a storm, the kind of silence that comes before lightning splits the world in half. "You sure you don't want to run?" he asked. Nalin gave a dry smile. "I stopped running when you took that bullet for me." He grunted. "I was just showing off." She touched his shoulder, brief and grounding. "If I don't make it." "You will." "But if I don't," she said, voice harder now, "you tell them my name. You tell them I didn't die easy." He looked at her, truly looked. Her cheekbone was swollen, lips cracked, skin weathered by the sun and smoke. But her eyes were wildfire. Not sad. Not scared. Alive. "I'll do more than tell them," he said. "I'll make sure they never forget." She stood, shoulders squared. The new posse came around the bend just as the sun split the canyon. 5 men this time. Better armed. Faces hard, unreadable. One of them held a wanted poster, Nalin's name scrawled beneath the sketch, the bounty now crossed out and replaced with a single word: kill. Samuel aimed, waited, squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing like a war drum. One rider pitched sideways off his horse, hit the ground hard. The others scattered behind cover, shouting. "They're spread out," Nalin said, ducking low behind a ridge. "If we split them up, we have a chance." Samuel pointed toward a high ledge. "You get there. You'll have a clean drop on the left side. I'll hold the right." "You sure you can hold?" He didn't smile this time. "I'll hold." She vanished like smoke. The next few minutes were chaos, dirt and lead flying like locusts in a windstorm. Samuel fired again, clipped a man's shoulder, sent him spinning behind a boulder. A bullet tore into the rock near his leg, spraying chips into his face. He tasted blood. Didn't care. From above, Nalin struck. She leapt from the ledge, blade flashing, landing on a bounty hunter mid-turn. He screamed once, then was still. Another raised his gun, she threw hers first. It embedded in his neck with a thunk. 3 down. Samuel took a shot at the 4th, missed. The last 2 flanked him fast. He dragged himself behind a rock, panting, empty rifle across his lap. The pain in his leg pulsed hot. One of the gunmen approached, slow, cautious. The other covered him from behind a scrub tree. "Cutter," the closer one called. "You're outnumbered. That woman ain't worth your life." Samuel laughed, a ragged, dry sound. "Buddy, you ain't worth my bullets." He reached into his belt, pulled a small stick of dynamite, his last card. Lit it with the match between his teeth and hurled it toward the man behind the tree. The blast shattered the quiet. Dust and fire ripped through the canyon mouth. Screaming. Then silence. When the dust cleared, only one man was left standing. Pale. Shaking. He turned, saw Nalin walking toward him, bloodied and silent. He dropped his weapon, hands raised. "I'm not getting paid enough for this," he said, backing away. She's all yours. Tell them, Nalin said. Tell them what you saw. He nodded, stumbling, and ran. She didn't chase him. Samuel exhaled, head resting against the stone. That was the last of the dynamite, he muttered. And your bullets? Empty. Nalin knelt beside him, hand resting on his. Then we're free. Free, he echoed like he didn't quite believe the word. They waited, watched the canyon hold still again. No hoofbeats. No gunfire. Just the wind, curling between stones like a tired ghost. She helped him up. He leaned on her, bloody and beaten but alive. They buried the bodies far from the old carving, marked them only with stones. Not out of mercy, but because the canyon deserved quiet now. By sunset, they stood at the mouth of the canyon, looking out over the wild stretch of desert. Smoke curled in the distance from a town too far to hear. A town that had put a price on a woman's life. You think they'll come again? Samuel asked. Nalin nodded. Eventually. What then? She looked at him, a slow smile growing. Then they'll find something worse waiting. You like that? They mounted up, two riders, scarred but unbroken, heading west toward nothing in particular. No law behind them, no trail ahead. Just the dust. And the story they carried. As they rode into the falling light, the narrator's voice returned, dry, low, and certain. Some stories are born in blood, others in fire. But the ones worth telling, they come from both. She was meant to be hunted, meant to die forgotten in a ditch. But she rose from the dust with a blade in her hand and a man at her side. And they carved her name into legend. So next time you ride through Apache country, remember this tale. Not just for the gunfights or the grit, but for the woman who didn't run. And the cowboy who stood between her and the grave. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.
The poker chips clicked like the ticking of a slow death. Smoke curled through the yellow spur saloon, thick as lies, wrapping around sweating foreheads and half-drained whiskey glasses. At the center table, under the sway of too much rye and desperation, sat Jeremiah Tomlin, a man who once had charm, now whittled down to a husk of debts and trembling hands. His mustache twitched as he surveyed his cards, eyes darting to the pile in front of his opponent. "All in," he croaked, pushing a stained stack of chips forward. Across from him sat Thatcher Crow, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to own a room. A black hat cast a shadow over his sun-worn face, and his expression hadn't changed in the 2 hours they'd been playing. He flicked his eyes to Jeremiah's shaking fingers, then to the sweat gathering along his collar. "You don't have anything left," Crow said flatly. Jeremiah's smile split wide, showing the teeth of a man who'd already made a pact with the devil. "I got 2, he slurred, lifting 2 fingers and pointing to the saloon doors. "My twins. Lena and Eli. Strong backs. Good workers. Boy rides like a Comanche. Girl can break horses. 18 today." Crow said nothing. The table went silent. "You're wagering your children?" The barkeep muttered, disgust laced in every syllable. Jeremiah didn't flinch. "A year. You get 'em for a year. You win, they go with you tonight. You lose, well, then I get this pot and a fresh start." Crow turned his cards over. 4 aces. The room let out a collective breath. Jeremiah didn't move. Just sat there blinking, like if he stayed still enough, time might reverse. "I'll take him now," Crow said, standing. He left the money untouched. Outside, Lena paced by the hitching post, her boots kicking up little storms of dust. Her arms were crossed, dark eyes fixed on the saloon. Eli leaned against the rail beside her, chewing a matchstick like it might hold some kind of answer. "Pa's been in there too long," Lena muttered. "He always is," Eli replied, more tired than annoyed. "Might be a good hand this time." Lena laughed bitterly. "Or he might have bet the mule again." Eli chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The saloon doors creaked. Crow stepped out, pausing just long enough for the twins to notice him before motioning toward his horse. Jeremiah followed, a slight stagger in his step. He didn't look at them. "What happened?" Lena asked. "You're going with him," he said, eyes glassy. "You belong to him for a spell." Silence. A wind kicked up the dust between them. "You sold us." Lena's voice cracked like a dry twig. "You, *, sold *, us?" Eli stepped forward, fists clenched. For how long? Jeremiah looked away. A year. You'll be all right. He's got land. Food. Better than I ever gave you. Lena stared at him, then at Crow, then back. You gave up your own blood like a busted watch. Crow mounted his horse. Saddle up, he said without looking at them. The ride out of town was long and silent. The town of Red Hollow shrank behind them, its crooked buildings looking like drunk teeth against the dusky horizon. As they rode, Lena scanned the land, dusty but not dead, with hills rising in the distance like sleeping giants. She stole a glance at Crow. He didn't seem cruel, just distant. Like something had been carved out of him and never filled back in. By the time they reached the ranch, night had dropped like a curtain. The land was massive, stretches of fenced pasture under starlight, a barn that groaned in the wind, and a long, low house with light in only one window. Crow dismounted. This is Crow Ranch. I don't tolerate laziness, stealing, or lies. Do what you're told and you'll eat well. Cause trouble and you'll be gone. Simple. What happens after a year? Eli asked. You're free to go, Crow said. That was the deal. He handed the reins to Lena. Her fingers tightened around the leather like it might keep her from breaking apart. They were shown to a small cabin. 2 cots, a water basin, and 1 narrow window. Lena sat on her cot, staring at the shadows stretching across the wooden floor. Why didn't we fight back? Eli asked. Because we had nowhere to run, Lena replied. And because, maybe he's not as bad as the men Pa usually owes. Still, Eli said, lying back. He owns us. Lena didn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the sounds of the night, the occasional lowing of cattle, the bark of a dog, the wind pushing against the wooden slats like a restless ghost. Just before dawn, she slipped on her boots and crept out. The ranch was still, coated in silver moonlight. She walked toward the fence line, heart pounding. She didn't know where she was going, only that staying meant giving up. A rustle in the trees caught her ear. She froze. Something moved. Not a deer. Not a cow. A figure. Watching. She took a step back. The figure vanished into the pines, leaving nothing but the whisper of disturbed branches. She returned to the cabin, breath shallow. The next morning came with the crack of dawn and the clang of a triangle bell. A ranch hand named Hawk, a wiry man with a missing tooth and a permanent scowl, led them through the chores. Cleaning stalls, hauling hay, learning the terrain. Thatcher Crow stayed distant, issuing orders with curt nods and sharp looks. But he watched Lena. Not like a predator, more like a man trying to decide if he recognized her. She ignored it. She focused on her work, on surviving. At dinner, they sat with the other hands. Laughter came in short bursts, mostly at Eli's expense after he got thrown from a spooked colt. I landed on my pride, he said, rubbing his backside. Think I broke it? One of the men, a grizzled old-timer called Rooster, chuckled. Might have improved it. Even Lena cracked a smile. But when she met Crow's gaze across the table, the smile faded. That night, she sat outside the cabin under the stars. Eli joined her, limping slightly. We'll get through it, he said quietly. We always do. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the dark tree line beyond the pasture. Someone was out there last night, she finally said. Eli looked up. You sure? She nodded. Watched me. Then disappeared. Eli looked toward the trees. Maybe it was one of the hands. Maybe, she said, unconvinced. They sat in silence a while longer. Somewhere, an owl hooted. The wind carried the smell of sage and sweat and secrets. Inside the house, Thatcher sat at his desk, an old photograph in his hand. A woman with fire in her eyes. A younger version of himself standing beside her. He touched the edge of the photo, then glanced out the window toward the twins' cabin. I never thought I'd see them again, he murmured. But the wind carried no answers, only dust and echoes, and the faint smell of smoke still clinging to memory. Far out, in the edge of the forest, a second figure appeared beside the first. Watching. waiting. And the past, like a wild stallion, was galloping home. The morning sun broke over the hills like a brand pressed to hide. Lena stood at the edge of the barn, pitchfork in hand, watching the light spill across Crow Ranch. Everything looked raw out here, unforgiving and pure. The land didn't care what had brought her. It just demanded something in return. Eli staggered out of the bunkhouse, shirt untucked, face still creased from sleep. "They got us hauling hay again?" "They got you hauling hay," Lena muttered. "I'm on stall duty." Eli groaned and limped toward the corral. Hawk, the wrangler with the missing tooth and a beard like tangled rope, barked orders without looking up. He was always moving, hands flying, boots never clean. Despite his gruffness, Eli seemed to like him. Lena worked silently. She shoveled manure, filled troughs, scrubbed bridles, all while keeping an eye on the trees. Ever since that first night, she felt eyes on her when no one was there. Not malevolent, just watchful. After chores, Crow found her near the paddock. "Come with me," he said. She hesitated, then followed. They rode up into the higher pasture, where the wind smelled like pine and the air bit with altitude. Crow dismounted near a clearing. A wooden target stood nailed to a tree stump. "Can you shoot?" he asked. She raised an eyebrow. "What do you think?" He handed her a Winchester. "Think you'd better learn anyway." She took it, adjusted her stance. The weight was familiar. Her father had taught her once, back before the bottle replaced his love. She fired. Missed. Crow stepped behind her, adjusted her shoulders. "Relax," he said. "Don't fight the recoil. Let it come to you." She fired again. Clipped the edge. He gave a short nod. "Better." She turned, searching his face. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I don't want you dead," he said simply. They rode back without speaking. At the ranch, Eli was leaning against the hitching post, a grin painted across his dusty face. "Guess who broke the mare that threw me yesterday? Did it fall asleep under you?" Lena teased. "Real funny," he said, rubbing his shoulder. "Hawk said I've got guts." "You've got no sense, that's what you've got." But she was smiling. Inside the barn, Crow stopped by Hawk, speaking in low tones. Lena couldn't catch the words, but she saw Crow nod toward the tree line. Hawk stiffened slightly, then spit into the dirt. That was answer enough. Later that night, the wind came stronger than before. Shutters rattled. A tree branch scraped the cabin roof like fingernails. Lena stared at the ceiling. "He knows something," she whispered. Eli rolled over. "Who?" "Crow. About whoever's watching the ranch." Eli mumbled something unintelligible and fell back asleep. She crept outside again. The pasture lay dark and silent. She approached the fence line slowly, heart drumming. Then she saw it, just for a second, a flicker of movement near the edge of the woods. Human. She didn't chase it this time. Just watched it vanish, then turned and went back inside. By week's end, the twins had fallen into rhythm. Lena handled the horses. Eli started riding fence lines with the other wranglers. At meals, they earned nods instead of silence. Even Rooster offered them a crude joke or two. The place was hard, but it had rules, and rules were safer than chaos. But not everything stayed peaceful. It started with a visitor, an old man with a badge and a busted nose. He arrived on a mule that looked just as mean. Crow met him at the gate. Lena watched from the porch. "Sheriff's name is Harlan," Hawk murmured beside her. "And where he rides, trouble rides close." They spoke in hushed tones. Then Harlan left, but not before casting a long look at the twins. "What was that about?" Lena asked. "Blackstone," Hawk said. "Neighboring rancher. Wants Crow's land. Always did." "Why?" "Because the mountain feeds this valley. Whoever controls the ridge, controls the water." Lena glanced at the tree-line again. Later that day, a stranger rode up the path. Tall, lean, dressed in fine leather too clean for honest work. He tipped his hat as Crow came to meet him. "Vern Blackstone," Hawk muttered under his breath. "Speak of the devil." Lena squinted. Blackstone's smile was slow and sharp, like a knife being unsheathed. "Come to make an offer," he said aloud. Crow didn't respond. Blackstone's eyes drifted to Lena. "You must be the girl I've heard about." She stiffened. Crow stepped between them. "They're not for sale." Blackstone smiled wider. "Didn't ask." Then he rode off, dust rising behind him like smoke from a fuse. That night the barn caught fire. Lena woke choking on smoke. The night was red and screaming. "Eli!" she shouted, already grabbing her boots. He was already up, limping hard toward the door. "Horses!" She grabbed a bucket, but it was hopeless. Flames licked the rafters. One of the colts inside shrieked. Eli pushed past her into the smoke. She screamed after him. Inside, the heat roared like a beast. Lena threw a wet sack over her head and followed. She found Eli coughing, dragging open a stall door. The colt bolted. Then the beam fell. They barely made it out, Eli collapsing onto the ground. Hawk pulled them both clear. Crow appeared a second later, eyes scanning the fire, face unreadable. By dawn, the barn was a skeleton. 2 horses dead. Eli had burns along his left arm. Crow gathered the ranch hands. Someone did this. This wasn't lightning. And it wasn't an accident. Lena stood behind him, still shaking. "I saw someone," she said. All heads turned. She swallowed. "The night before. At the tree line. Watching." Crow's eyes met hers. "Show me." They rode together, Lena guiding him through the dense brush. She pointed to a low ridge. There, hidden beneath some pine boughs, was a small camp. Cold ashes. Footprints. A wool shawl tucked beneath a saddlebag. Crow picked it up slowly. His hand trembled. Lena stepped closer, staring at the shawl. It was worn, but familiar. The embroidery, faded but unmistakable, roses stitched in crimson thread. Her breath caught. "I know this," she whispered. Crow looked at her, eyes shadowed. "So do I." They stood in silence, the forest closing around them. Behind them, something moved. Lena turned fast, rifle raised, but nothing was there. She looked at Crow. "She's alive, isn't she?" His face told her everything. "We have to find her," she said. He nodded once. But something in his eyes said he already had, and let her go. They rode back to the ranch under a sky smeared with red, the wind whispering secrets through the branches. The fire had scorched more than wood. It had awakened something buried. The past was no longer waiting. It was walking straight for them. The pines stood still that morning, as if they too were listening. Lena rode ahead of the others, wind slicing past her cheeks, the shawl tied to her saddle horn fluttering like a torn flag. Her fingers clutched the reins, but her mind was a storm, memories, questions, pieces that didn't fit. Her mother had sewn that shawl. She remembered it, wrapped around her during the harsh winters in the Dakotas, smelling faintly of lavender and wood smoke. Her mother, Miriam, had vanished when Lena and Eli were barely 9. Pa had said she'd run off. Some days he said she was dead. Other days, he claimed she'd never existed. Drunken words. Slurred lies. But now Lena knew the truth. Her mother hadn't disappeared. She'd been hiding. They stopped at the ridge, where the burned scent of the barn still clung to the wind. Hawk dismounted, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the treeline. "We track from here," he said. "Footprints head north. Deep woods. No one just passes through there." Crow didn't respond. He looked different now, less like a man of land, more like a soldier before the final charge. Whatever secrets he held, Lena could see they weren't buried anymore. They were rising. They entered the forest. The world changed beyond the fence line. Shadows moved differently. Pine needles muffled footsteps. The air grew thick and damp, smelling of moss and silence. Birds fell quiet. Even Eli, trailing with his injured arm bound tight, said nothing. Hours passed. They followed faint signs, a broken branch, the smudge of ash, a forgotten scarf. At dusk, they found a clearing. A small, weather-beaten cabin sat like a wound in the wood. Smoke curled from the chimney. Lena dismounted before anyone could stop her. Crow followed, but she didn't wait. Her boots crunched over pine needles as she approached the door. She hesitated, then knocked. It opened. A woman stood there, older than she remembered but unmistakable. The same fierce eyes. The same stubborn jaw. Miriam. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Ma! Miriam's hand trembled against the doorframe. Lena. They stared at each other as if the years had never passed, and yet were carved into every line on their faces. Then Eli stepped forward. Mama! Tears welled in Miriam's eyes. She reached for them, then stopped herself, trembling. I never wanted to leave, she said. I never wanted to go. But I had to. Your father, he wasn't always like he ended up, but when he changed for good. I tried to take you with me. He stopped me. He would've. She broke off. Crow stepped beside Lena. Miriam's eyes shifted to him, and something deeper than grief passed between them. Thatcher, she said softly. You found them. I did, he said. Why now? Lena asked. Why after all this time? Why didn't you come back? Miriam looked at the ground. Because I was being watched. Blackstone's men. I knew if I showed myself, they'd find you too. So I stayed close. Watched from the trees. Made sure you were safe, even if it meant never speaking. You set the fire? Crow asked. Miriam stiffened. No. I tried to warn you. I left the ashes for you to find. The shawl too. But someone else was in the woods, watching me too. Crow's jaw tightened. Blackstone. Miriam nodded. He's planning something. He wants the water, and he knows you won't sell. He's getting desperate. A rustle in the trees made everyone freeze. Crow motioned for silence. Hawk raised his rifle. A voice called out, smooth, mocking. Well, hell, this is cozy. Blackstone stepped into the clearing, flanked by 2 hired guns. His coat was dustless, his smile full of teeth. I hoped I'd find you here, he said. Crow stepped forward. You've crossed the line, Blackstone. Blackstone tilted his head. And you've been harboring a runaway wife. That's illegal in most parts, isn't it? No law worth its salt would call what Jeremiah Tomlin was doing marriage, Miriam snapped. Blackstone chuckled. Well, ain't this sentimental? But I'm not here for stories. I'm here for land. You won't get it, Crow said. Blackstone's grin widened. Then I'll burn it all down. Same as the barn. I've got more fire where that came from. The threat hung heavy in the air. Then Lena stepped forward. You won't touch this ranch. Blackstone looked amused. And what are you going to do, girl? Shoot me. If I have to, she said. He eyed her. You've got your mother's fire. Shame you ended up in a pile of gambling debt. Better that than licking boots for water rights. That wiped the smirk off his face. He turned to Crow. You've got until sundown tomorrow. Sell me the land, or I take it. And I won't be kind about it. He walked off into the trees. The silence that followed was suffocating. Back at the ranch, preparations began. Every ranch hand was armed. Fences were checked. Water barrels were filled. The whole place was a powder keg. Eli, bandaged and stubborn, refused to rest. I can shoot with one hand, he insisted. Crow clapped him on the shoulder. You'll stand watch on the ridge. Miriam stayed in the main house, her eyes never far from Lena. That night, under a sky full of stars, Lena sat with her mother near the fire. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Miriam said, You've grown strong. I had to. I'm sorry you had to. Lena looked at her, eyes shining. You survived. That taught me how. They sat in silence, fire crackling, wind rising through the pines. In the distance, the low sound of hoofbeats began to build. Blackstone was coming. And tomorrow would bring fire or freedom. Dawn rose blood orange over Crow Ranch. A hush held the land in its grip, the kind that comes just before a storm. Wind cut low across the prairie, rippling the tall grass like a warning whispered through clenched teeth. Lena stood alone on the porch, rifle across her back, her mother's shawl tied around her shoulders. She had not slept. None of them had. Inside the house, Eli lay awake, revolver on the nightstand, burned bandages freshly wrapped. Miriam brewed coffee she never drank. Hawk stood at the gate, sharpening a blade already sharp enough. At the far edge of the horizon, dust began to rise. "They're coming," Lena said softly. Crow appeared beside her. His face was carved from something older than stone, eyes shadowed with memory, purpose, and pain. He wore no hat, just a dark coat and a look that said he'd buried more men than he could name. "You don't have to stay out here," he said. "I do," Lena replied. He nodded once. The dust cloud thickened. 6 riders. Then 9. Guns slung over their shoulders, kerchiefs masking their jaws, horses foaming at the bit. At the center was Blackstone, dressed like a politician and riding like a warlord. He halted 20 feet from the gate. "I gave you until dawn," he called out. "You got it," Crow replied. "Now get off my land." Blackstone smiled. "This isn't yours anymore." He raised his hand. The first shot split the silence. Hawk dropped the closest rider before the bullet reached the ranch house. Gunfire exploded like thunder, short, sharp cracks rolling over the ridge. Lena ducked behind a water trough, heart pounding like a war drum. She aimed and fired, once, twice. A rider spun from his saddle and crashed into the dust. Eli returned fire from the loft window, his left arm useless, right hand steady. Miriam had taken shelter inside, her old shotgun loaded and across her lap. But her eyes were calm, she had stared down worse and survived. Blackstone's men pushed forward, but Crow met them at the fence line like a thunderclap. He moved like someone who knew the weight of killing, measured, brutal, decisive. His first shot shattered a man's shoulder. His second ended another. Lena saw Hawk fall. A bullet had grazed his leg, and he went down swearing, dragging himself behind a wagon wheel. She scrambled toward him through gun smoke and dirt. "Got you," she said, grabbing his arm. "Not yet," he coughed. "But soon." She pulled him to cover and fired again. A figure darted from the trees, trying to flank them. She didn't hesitate. The crack of her rifle dropped him mid-step. Then came the scream of horses. From the west, 3 riders emerged, neighbors, old allies Crow had once helped during a dry season. They had heard the gunfire. Now they came like ghosts with shotguns. Blackstone cursed, pulling his horse around. The tide turned. His men began to fall back. One by one, they dropped or fled. Lena spotted Blackstone trying to circle around the barn, making for the back of the house. She sprinted after him. He dismounted near the kitchen door, gun in hand. Miriam stood inside, waiting. He didn't see Lena until she cocked the hammer behind him. "Don't move," she said. He turned, smiling. "You won't do it," he said. "You're not like me." "You're right," she said. "I'm not." But it was Miriam who fired. The shotgun blast echoed like a crack of finality. Blackstone dropped, coat smoking, surprise frozen on his face. Lena stared at her mother, who lowered the gun with shaking hands. "I was married to a man like him," Miriam said. "I know exactly what he would have done." By midday, the ranch was still. The dead were dragged away. The wounded were tended to. Smoke rose in thin tendrils from the scorched grass. Crow stood at the fence, silent, hands stained. Lena approached him. "You saved us," she said. He didn't look at her. "No. You saved yourselves." He turned, gaze heavy. "But the cost." "I know." He studied her. "What will you do now?" She looked around. At the ranch. At Eli, helping bandage Hawk's leg. At Miriam, sitting in the shade, finally at peace. "I think this place still needs people who'll fight for it." Crow gave the barest hint of a smile. "You sound like someone I used to know." "Let me guess," Lena said. "She wore a shawl like this." He nodded. She did. There was a long silence, filled only by the wind and the creak of a busted wheel. That evening, as the sun dipped low and gold bled into the hills, the ranch hands gathered for supper. The benches were crowded, bowls full, laughter tentative but real. A fire crackled in the center, and for once no one looked over their shoulder. Lena sat with her family, her whole family. Across from her, Crow stood, raising a tin cup. "To the living," he said. "And to the ghosts that guard them," Miriam added. They drank. Later, when the fire burned low, Lena stepped away, walking out into the pasture. The stars overhead were sharp and countless. She thought of all they'd lost, and all they'd found again. A voice stirred in the dark. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Eli asked, stepping beside her. She smiled. "Used to. Not anymore." "Why?" "Because for once the story didn't end in a grave or a bottle. It ended in fire, and we walked through it." He nodded, brushing his knuckles against hers. "Reckon I'll stay too. For now." Above them, an owl cried once and vanished into the trees. And behind them, Crow Ranch stood, not untouched but unbroken. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.